I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my informative co-host, Brett.
Alice, I like to be informative, but today I will not be the most informative person on the show. By far, this may be the most excited I have been to record an episode of the show.
I agree with you. Guys, there is no introduction worthy of the Marcia Clark, who is our guest today. You know her from her incredible career as an attorney. She was the prosecutor for the O.J. Simpson trial. She has since been an author, a television producer, and her newest project is a podcast you're all going to want to run to subscribe to. Wondery's new Informants, Lawyer X, a 9-part true crime podcast that will have you on the edge of your seat. I sure was when I was listening. Marcia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. What a thrill. This is just wonderful.
Wow. I think we've already been fangirling and fanboying because we are obviously prosecutors. And to get to talk to one of the best in the game is a thrill for us. And one thing, you have had such a storied and varied career as an attorney. A lot of attorneys go to law school and then just do the go to law firm, die a lawyer. That's it. That is not you. You have had probably one of the most exciting careers of an attorney. I know we don't have enough time to go through all of it, but can you give us some of the highlights of what's drawn you to the law, what drew you to be a prosecutor, and how these twists and turns in your exciting career have come to be?
I didn't mean for it to be an exciting career, honestly. Things just kind of happened, So I never wanted to be a lawyer. I never thought about being a lawyer. And it was one of those things where what I really did think about when I was in undergrad, I majored in poli-sci, specialized in international relations, especially the Middle East. And I wanted to work for the Foreign Office, for the State Department. And I wanted to be on the ground, in the Middle East and really mixing it up and doing it. And so I applied and they asked me if I could type. And I type this. Anyway, that was not what I was looking to do. So I had to think about, so now what do I do? That was my big career plans there. That went up in smoke. And I just kind of thought about, what do I like to do? Well, I like to argue. Obviously, everybody tells me I do. I didn't know that, but they say. And you know what I mean? It just kind of, well, I guess I should go to law school. And it made me miserable because I'm one of those people, I really hated school, hated every bit of school. I hated kindergarten. Hated it all. And the idea of going back to school just made me miserable. And oh my God, more school. This is the last thing I want. But I had to do it. And so, the way I go to school is the way I've always gone to school, which is not to go and just show up and take the exam. And basically that is what I tried to do as much as possible in law school. So I got through that. But I did discover within the first 2 months of my first year, I knew I was going to practice criminal law. That was it for me. And I took all the other classes. You guys know you have to. But I also took other stuff that I didn't have to, like patent law, copyrights. I thought that was pretty cool stuff, but it didn't really float my boat, not the way criminal law did. And that was that. So it was nice to have that certainty because it's tough if you don't, you don't know what kind of law you want to practice. And at first I wanted to be a defense attorney. I was never going to work for the man, not me. So I was a rebel without a clue, and that's what I was going to do. And so I started clerking at a defense law firm, and then I was an associate for a year, and then found that I really was more interested in the victims than the defendants. This was not a good look for a defense attorney. So I wound up going to the DA's office. And I thought, if I don't get into the DA's office, I'm just not going to practice law. Then what am I going to do? That I didn't get that far. Thank goodness I didn't have to. I mean, I think one of the things I think I said when they hired me was, you will decide whether I'm a lawyer or a bush pilot in Australia. Because what else am I going to do? So they hired me. So then that was it for like 14 years. I thought I was going to be in the prosecutor's office. I thought they were going to carry me out in a pine box. That was my career plan. I was never going to leave. And I wound up in the special trials unit for the last 10 years of my life in the DA's office. And that's all the big complex cases. These are cases that go on, like one of my first cases went on for almost 2 years.
Oh,
At
wow.
the end of which there was so stressful that I lost my hair. I mean, I'd wake up with clumps of hair on the pillow because the stress, I didn't know what was going on. One of the senior lawyers said, "Oh yeah, it's the stress."
Ugh.
And they said, "You only have so many of these in you. You will not want to be in this unit forever." And I thought, you know what? You're wrong. I'm going to die here. Yeah. He was right, of course. And then, the Simpson case. And the Simpson case really, had it not happened, I'd probably still be in the office, honestly. But it was such a miserable experience. And it so disappointed me in every way possible, in the mission of being a prosecutor, in the justice system, in the ways that justice can be perverted and the truth can be made irrelevant. I lost, as one of my friends said, who also left the office, I felt like I lost my mojo. I had no more at that time. Anyway, I just had no more oomph to give it. I couldn't go back in and fight again. I have since refound that, I have rekindled that flame, but in a different way. I went through writing books, writing fiction, crime fiction, then went into television production and wrote scripts. And I loved doing that. That was just a blast.
Can I ask you, I mean, there's so much there, and it is devastating to hear that the Simpson case made you lose your mojo at the time. I mean, what a loss for the prosecutor bar. But I think the more interesting thing is you said you found your mojo again, because I can imagine how devastating Simpson would have been as the prosecutor. How did you find your mojo again? And now I would say you are changing the landscape of these types of cases like the Simpson case, but on a different platform, like TV and books and podcasts. So how did you find your mojo again?
Well, it was a gradual process, and the process included not doing it at all, really not practicing law at all for quite some time. But then I discovered the beautiful world of criminal appeals. I think it's probably true across the country that when you get convicted of a felony, you have the right to a direct appeal, right? And if you can't afford a lawyer at that point, and who can, because even if you had paid for a lawyer in trial, you're tapped out by the time you get convicted, the Court of Appeal appoints a lawyer to represent you in your direct appeal. And that's something that you can do on your own. You don't go to an office, you work on your own. But there's a great community of people who do this work. And it's really a noble job. It's a really great way. It feels like as close as you can come to the pure practice of law. You're not out there trying to score clients. You don't have to. That's the problem, is too many, not too few. But it's very much about the law and applying the law to the facts. And you can't mess around with the record. You have the trial record that you do. You have to stick to that record, and you have to stick to what's true. And you make legal arguments based on, was it done correctly? Was it fair trial? Were there errors that were so unfair that the person really did not get a fair trial? And does he deserve a reversal, a lesser sentence, a reduction in the crime, whatever it might be? But it's much more real, if you know what I mean. It's not a lot of razzle dazzle. I mean, It certainly does require you to know how to write. You do have to know how to write, how to research, how to reason. And the community of lawyers who do this for a living, these are the smart kids. I never hung out with them.
I don't believe that.
As someone who does the appeals for our office, I agree with you. It is the smart kids doing it. And I would say your clients are very lucky to have you. And as Alice said, the loss for the prosecutor's bar has really been the gain, I think, for all of us. And you've done so much, and now you are moving into this world of podcasting with this new podcast, Informants, Lawyer X. And I got to tell you, I listened to the first episode, and I was just so drawn into it. And I was surprised that, you talked about being a bush pilot in Australia. Well, it seems like that is coming true because this case actually takes place in Australia. So I'm curious, how did you come upon this story and what made you decide this is something I want to sink my teeth into?
Yeah, really, Brett, it was a total accident. This was actually suggested to me as the basis for a scripted show, something fiction. And I thought, well, but this is true. But it's like even weirder that it's true. And at that time, all I knew was there was some magazine article about it. I knew this much, very little. And then I started to dig into it. I found that books had been written and a reporter had actually broken this story. And it all started with a reporter, really good one, Anthony Dowsley. He went to a cop bar. Hanging out in a cop bar is a smart thing to do if you're a journalist. Good stories, right? Cops have great stories. And they hear this name getting bandied about, Nicola Gobbo. And they're rumoring, gossiping about, she's sleeping with this cop. She's a defense attorney, and she's a high-powered defense attorney who's representing some of the biggest drug lords, kingpins, and murderers in Australia. She's sleeping with this cop, and it looks like, and he's kind of tossing that off. I don't really care about that. People will he and she wherever. But then it looks like she's actually mingling in all of the upper echelons as well of cops. Well, defense attorneys don't do that, and that was really a weird thing to him. So he starts to get into it. And what he unravels is this unbelievable story about this woman who is at the top of her game. She's a celebrated lawyer, very famous. By the way, she comes from legal royalty. Her uncle, Sir James Gobbo, very famous barrister. And she looks like she's headed for nothing but the top. And she, at one point in her life, was actually hoping to be prime minister. And she is really successful. She becomes the prized informant for the cops and informs and it betrays all her clients, turns on them, and she informs on all the biggest guys. And she turns the tide, actually, herself, single-handedly almost, of the gangland wars. At that time, Australia, and particularly in Melbourne, they were having a bad time with drugs. Ecstasy, meth was really flooding the streets. And these drug lords were shooting each other in the streets. And this is a beautiful city. Melbourne is absolutely gorgeous, very cultured. And people who, it was a peaceful life. It's a lovely life. And suddenly bodies are dropping in the streets. I mean, it was horrible. The cops were under enormous pressure. Certainly they had to know. You do not deal with a defense attorney. I mean, there's attorney-client privilege, as we know, guys. You can't breach that. Well, they did. And she let them. And not only did she let them, but she ran after them to try and snitch more. And so it was a constant thing that was going on between them. And she was almost a power player where she was feeding information to the cops, but also taking their information and feeding it to her clients as well. This story is so incredible, the twists and turns. And in the middle of it all is a double homicide, an execution style homicide of a husband and wife that is still unsolved, that she seems to be hip deep in terms of connecting the players. So, I mean, the number of twists and turns in this thing, as I researched it, I read the books, put the episodes together, we collaborated in the writing. And even as I'm recording it, I'm going, this can't be true. I can't believe this is happening. So, yeah, this is the craziest legal story I have ever heard.
I mean, I agree with you. It really has all these twists and turns. I mean, you're right. Attorney-client privilege is like ringing in my ears, but also she has children. She's dealing with the most dangerous criminals in Australia. Obviously, her life is on the line. And usually when you have these type of informants, they are in the gang. They're not the ones representing them. I mean, this is just fascinating. And then have your perspective of storytelling is something that I know our listeners are going to absolutely love. So in putting this together, I mean, you said you did all the research. Give us a little insight into this mode of storytelling. You've done the TV script writing. You chose to go podcast instead of script writing. What do you think about the podcast realm allows you to tell the story in a different way? And why did you choose this method?
Well, it really is person-to-person storytelling. It's a very intimate way of communicating, as you guys know, with the audience. We put on the headphones and we listen, and somebody's telling me a story. And when it's something like this where it's, and then, I mean, imagine that you fall on a story that is so incredible that every time you turn around, there's another twist to it that makes your head explode. I mean, and you just want to tell someone about it. Well, in a podcast, you get to turn on the microphone and start recording and say, guys, listen to this. You won't believe what I'm going to tell you, but it's all true. And that's the thing about this particular story is, yes, it would be a fabulous fictional series because you wouldn't have to fictionalize it much. Just tell the truth. You've got a great story that goes on, because having an attorney who's planted in the middle of these incredibly powerful drug lords and murderers, and she has all the skinny on them. She's sleeping with some of them. She's also sleeping with some of the cops. I mean, and it goes all over the place. There's nothing but stories to tell here. And just, there's so many questions actually that I kept bumping up against. Like, why would she do this? She's at the top of her game, doing very well. She's so successful, and she puts it all at risk, like you said, with the 2 children. She's got 2 children. By the way, who's the father? That's another mystery.
Podcast series 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this story is, it's got the sex, it's got drugs, it's got violence, it's got mystery, it's got everything. But of course, the sexiest thing to me is attorney-client privilege. And I just, listening to this, in my mind, I could not comprehend what I was hearing, that this attorney is an informant at the same time. I've never seen anything like that. And you have asked the question that is just burning in my mind. Why would she do this? Do you have any insight in what led her down this just unimaginable path for an attorney?
I have grappled with this question for the past 2 years, ever since I bumped into this story. It's like, why? I think that there are many answers to this question, actually, and probably more than I can identify. But some of the answers seem to be, number one, there's a power and control aspect to this. You're at the vortex of all of this information that can fuel, that it can empower either one side or the other. And you get to decide which side you empower. You can empower the police with information that you're getting from your clients, and you empower the clients with what you get from the police. So you're in this kind of in the middle of all of this. You're the puppet master. So there's that. She also herself diagnosed herself at one point, and you'll hear from her in the podcast, saying that she's a pleaser. So whatever she does, she wants to be the most impressive fill in the blank you've ever seen. When she became an informant, she wanted to be the best informant the cops had ever seen. And she was. I mean, she definitely succeeded in that. So, there's that too. And then there may be a part of it, a piece of this, that is, she was sick of all these murders happening in Melbourne. I mean, she lived there. It was really ruining the quality of life for people living in this beautiful city. So there's that too. I've identified that much. There's probably more.
I think each of those theories could be their own podcast. That is so fascinating. And obviously this, whatever you want to call it, scandal, it comes to light, obviously, because you're telling the story. And one thing, without giving too much away, but it's not all tied up neatly, right? I mean, this is, like you said, there's a double homicide execution style in the middle of this story that's still unsolved. And so in the midst of that, how do you tell a story? And it always pulls at me when I can't tell a full story where there's full circle. Someone's in prison or someone's now living a wonderful life in, the Caribbean or something like that. I don't think we have that in this particular series. So what does that mean for storytelling and what's next?
Well, that's the thing. It's an ongoing story. The story has not ended. I mean, this story could actually have a sequel because cases are continuing to get reversed as a result of what she did. Because of the ethical violations, because the attorney-client privilege was breached so badly, and people got convicted where they could say it was prejudicial, and they could not have gotten a conviction without the illegally acquired information. And of course, the police should have known that. Police heads have not rolled yet, and I think that's pretty interesting. And I wonder whether it's because people really don't want to punish them, because after all, they got the bad guys off the streets. Unfortunately, though, now that convictions are getting reversed, bad guys are hitting the streets again, and they're continuing to. And that's it. So the story is yet untold in the sense that it's still unfolding. Nicola Gobbo herself is in hiding. We reached out to her a number of times through her lawyer, but never heard back. And probably for her safety, it's best that she not. There's a lot of people who would wish her ill, if you will. And then, of course, there are the conflicts of interest, too. I mean, you guys know very well, a defense attorney is not allowed to be conflicted in what they do, and that means that they cannot represent opposing interests. She did it all the time, and she did it in multiple layers. So she would represent the lower drug runner in order to get him to turn and cop out, to take the fall, if you will, in order to protect the upper guys that they work for, because she's protecting her bigger clients at the expense of the little guys. So, I mean, there's all of that going on as well. And I spoke to, in the podcast, you'll hear me interview one of the lawyers in Australia who is also a very prominent criminal lawyer in Australia, Zara Gard-Wilson, very good lawyer, and talked about her experience of bumping into Nicola Gobbo and watching her do it, watching her tell a guy that the cops did not have a good case on him, telling him to go ahead and plead guilty because, we'll just get you straight possession or whatever it is, knock down the charge a little bit, but plead guilty and make it all go away, because if he snitched, which is what the cops wanted from him, that's why they bust the little guys, hoping to get some information on the big guys. And if he did snitch, that would hurt her bigger clients. So she shut him down quickly. And Zara saw that and said, nobody knew at that time. When Zara saw this, no one knew what was going on, but she had a feeling, this is bad news, and I have bad feelings about this. So there were all kinds of things going on, all kinds of craziness happening in the context of this case that probably is going to unfold for a while still.
Well, you have me gripped. I know everyone listening to you talk about it is gripped. You guys have got to check out Wondery's new 9-part true crime podcast, Informants, Lawyer X. You are hearing from the host herself, Marcia Clark. You know her from prosecuting O.J. Simpson and so much more. You hear how passionate she is about this. But before I let you go, we have a lot of passionate people who listen to our podcast, whether they're in the legal field or not. They always want to know, what advice can you give? You have lived such a varied life, always seeking justice, whether it's through your storytelling or through prosecution. If you could leave our listeners with a nugget of wisdom from all that you've encountered.
My theory of life. I think my guiding principle has always been, do what you love. Find what you love and do what you love. And don't be rigid about what that might mean. Be open to the possibility that what you love might not be possible. So there are probably many things that you love. Go for it.
Incredible wisdom. Truly, Marcia, I would just sit at your feet and listen to storytelling all day. We are just so thankful that you took the time to come talk to us about your newest podcast and give us a little bit of your, hard-earned wisdom. Thank you, Marcia, so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure with you guys. Really, thank you.
Thank you. Well, you guys go listen to Wondery's Informants Lawyer X podcast. You will not be sorry. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. You know what? I personally like it. You got to make the other side sweat a little bit. We know we're in the presence of greatness. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not up to that kind of strategic thinking.
No, it really is. It's a thrill to have you on. I mean, it's always fun to talk to a fellow prosecutor.
It is. It really is. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, guys. This is
Absolutely.
so cool. Thank you so much, guys. It really was fun. It's, I was hoping to hear your prosecutor stories, but
nothing like yours.
We definitely do that next time.